My bishop stole $15 million from our parish and framed me for child abuse while I was burying my dying mother. What he didn't know was that before I became a priest, I used to eliminate people that governments couldn't touch, and now he just made himself my next target. Let me tell you who I really am. I'm Father Michael Collins, 52 years old, and I've been serving God for 25 years. That Wednesday morning, still wearing dirt from my mother's grave, FBI agents were at my church door with arrest warrants. Father Collins, you're under investigation for sexual misconduct with minors, multiple allegations, financial impropriety. 25 years of faithful service destroyed with made-up accusations and forged financial records. Morrison stood behind the FBI agents, his face looking all righteous and disappointed. I'm sorry, Michael. The evidence is overwhelming. The man who'd ordained me was destroying me with lies while I was still grieving my mother's death. But Morrison made one huge mistake. He thought 25 years of peaceful ministry had made me forget who I used to be. He forgot what I did before I heard God's call. He forgot about the night I almost didn't make it home from Afghanistan. The night when Captain Morrison of the 3rd Intelligence Battalion ordered me to eliminate a village elder who'd been compromising operational security. I was 800 meters out, finger on the trigger, when I realized Morrison was selling weapons to the Taliban and the village elder had evidence. I didn't take the shot. Instead, I documented Morrison's treachery and reported it up the chain. Morrison was quietly transferred stateside, his military career over. I thought justice had been served. I'd spent 25 years believing Morrison had learned from his mistakes, that his calling to ministry was genuine repentance for his military crimes. I was wrong. Morrison hadn't found God. He'd found a better cover for his criminal operations. I used to eliminate targets that governments couldn't touch through legal channels. Warlords, human traffickers, terrorists. Men who thought power made them untouchable. They were all wrong. Morrison hadn't just stolen money. While I was caring for my dying mother, he was systematically transferring parish funds to offshore accounts and creating false evidence of my corruption. But I discovered something way worse. Morrison had been targeting dying parishioners, convincing them to donate their entire estates to God while they were medicated and vulnerable. Mrs. Henderson, 89, with dementia. He'd gotten her to sign over her $1.2 million house the day before she died. The signatures were barely readable scrawls from someone who didn't understand what she was signing. But that wasn't the worst evil. Morrison had been secretly recording confessions for 20 years. Every sin, every secret, every moment of vulnerability when people sought God's forgiveness. He'd turned it into blackmail material. Senator Williams's confession about his gambling addiction became political leverage. Judge Martinez's confession about her daughter's drug problems became courthouse influence. But the recordings revealed something way worse. Morrison had been using confession to identify potential victims for his trafficking network. When parents confessed their struggles with troubled children, Morrison would offer special counseling programs that were actually recruitment pipelines. Mrs. Patterson confessed that her 12-year-old son was acting out after his father's death. Morrison convinced her that the boy needed intensive spiritual guidance at his retreat center. 3 days later, Tommy Patterson was marked for trafficking to a client in Mexico City. Morrison had weaponized the sacred seal of confession. He'd turned the most holy sacrament into criminal intelligence gathering. The recording system was sophisticated beyond anything I'd seen in military intelligence. Hidden microphones in confessional booths, audio analysis software that identified keywords related to vulnerable children, automated transcription that flagged potential trafficking targets. Morrison had turned every confession into a hunting expedition for new victims. The system's sophistication was military-grade. Morrison had partnered with a former NSA contractor to develop artificial intelligence that could analyze speech patterns, identify emotional vulnerabilities, and predict which families were most likely to surrender their children to spiritual programs. But the most twisted element was Morrison's Guardian Angel program. When parents confessed fears about their children's safety, Morrison would arrange coincidental dangerous situations, near drownings, attempted kidnappings, car accidents, then heroically intervene to save the child. Grateful parents would then entrust their miracle-saved children to Morrison's special protection programs, never realizing they were delivering their kids directly to traffickers. Morrison had weaponized parents' love and gratitude against their own children. The $15 million was money I'd personally raised over 15 years. Cancer research funds from parents who'd buried children, hurricane relief money, scholarship funds for inner-city kids. Morrison had made up sexual abuse allegations using real abuse survivors from other parishes, paying them to falsely claim I was their abuser. Sarah Mitchell, molested by Father Williams in Boston, was paid $50,000 to claim I had abused her during years I was deployed overseas. But worse, I found video evidence of Morrison's coaching sessions with these victims, hours of footage showing him manipulating traumatized women, teaching them to embed false memories of abuse that never happened. He'd hired professional psychologists to help implant convincing lies into damaged minds. "Remember, he made you feel safe first," Morrison's voice coached on one recording. "That's how predators work. They build trust, then violate it." Morrison had turned real trauma into manufactured evidence. He'd re-traumatized abuse survivors by forcing them to create false memories of violations that never occurred. But I found something that made my hands shake with rage. Morrison had been providing real children to actual pedophiles while destroying innocent priests with fake accusations. The ultimate protection racket. Destroy the protectors, supply the predators. The media coverage was brutal. Predator priests' double life exposed. Morrison had leaked my military records to make my sniper background sound sinister. Trained killer becomes children's minister. But that night I found Morrison's real evidence against me, hidden psychiatric evaluations he'd commissioned without my knowledge, concluding I was psychologically damaged by military service and potentially dangerous to vulnerable populations. Morrison had been planning my destruction for over 2 years, building a psychological case that my military background made me unsuitable for ministry. But Morrison had forgotten something important. I hadn't just been a soldier before joining the priesthood. I'd been a very special kind of soldier, the kind who made impossible problems disappear without leaving fingerprints. Before I answered God's call, I spent 8 years as a Marine Scout sniper. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, classified operations in places that don't officially exist, 247 confirmed kills, all of them monsters who thought they were untouchable. But one target haunted me until I found God. Qadim al-Rashid, a warlord who'd been trafficking children across the Afghan border. I'd tracked him for 3 weeks, learned his routines, his weaknesses. When I finally had a clean shot, I discovered something that changed everything. Al-Rashid was meeting with an American contractor, someone who looked exactly like Morrison. Same build, same gestures, same cold eyes. But it wasn't just resemblance. When the man turned, I saw the distinctive scar on his left hand from a training accident at Quantico. It was Morrison. My future bishop was coordinating child trafficking operations with Afghan warlords in 1999. The shot I took that day eliminated al-Rashid, but Morrison disappeared into the crowd. I reported the American connection, but Morrison had already covered his tracks. His military records were classified, his presence in Afghanistan officially denied. I'd spent 25 years wondering if I'd imagined the resemblance. Now I knew I hadn't. Morrison's involvement in international criminal networks went back decades. He'd been working with child traffickers since before he became a bishop. My military service hadn't just trained me to hunt criminals. It had put me on Morrison's trail 25 years ago. But there was more. The intelligence files I'd accessed showed Morrison had been recruiting military personnel for his trafficking network. Soldiers with post-traumatic stress, financial problems, or disciplinary issues. Men Morrison could manipulate into moving children across international borders under cover of military operations. The recruitment was systematic. Morrison had identified 47 servicemen over 15 years, all with vulnerabilities he could exploit. Sergeant Rodriguez, facing court-martial for gambling debts, Morrison paid off his creditors in exchange for smuggling children through military transport. Lieutenant Thompson, struggling with PTSD and alcoholism, Morrison provided treatment while recruiting him as a courier. Morrison had been using the U.S. military as a trafficking pipeline for over 2 decades. But the most chilling discovery was Morrison's Project Shepherd, a plan to infiltrate religious organizations worldwide with trained operatives who would establish trafficking networks using missionary work as cover. Morrison had already placed 23 operatives in churches across Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia. Each operative was a specially trained priest or missionary worker who appeared legitimate while actually establishing trafficking pipelines to feed Morrison's American clients. Orphanages became supply sources. Mission schools became selection centers. Religious charities became money laundering operations. Morrison's financial records showed massive inconsistencies when I applied military intelligence analysis. Money flowing to shell companies in 12 countries. Payments to crisis management firms and private military contractors who provided security services. Morrison was running a paramilitary operation designed to eliminate threats to his criminal empire. Morrison was running a nationwide operation, systematically looting Catholic churches across America. He'd stolen over $340 million from dozens of parishes, always using the same pattern: plant evidence, destroy the priest, claim the insurance money. But I found something that made my blood freeze. Morrison wasn't just destroying priests who threatened his financial schemes. He was protecting actual pedophiles who paid him for immunity. Father Kowalski in Milwaukee, caught with child pornography. Morrison had transferred him to a new parish. Father Santos in Phoenix, accused by 6 children. Morrison had intimidated the families and promoted Santos to youth minister. Morrison was enabling real child abuse while destroying innocent men with false accusations. Every single one of the 53 priests Morrison had destroyed was innocent. 3 had committed suicide. 2 had died homeless. 1 had been murdered in what police classified as a random robbery, but I recognized the tactical signature of Morrison's military contractors. Morrison had detailed psychological profiles on over 200 priests across 17 states. He'd identified their weaknesses, their fears, their secrets for future exploitation. Morrison had turned the Catholic Church into a criminal empire with himself as the untouchable emperor. I spent 72 hours mapping Morrison's entire criminal network using military intelligence protocols. Every fake accusation, every stolen dollar, every destroyed priest, every connection to organized crime families, every protected pedophile. I created a ghost identity that would appeal to Morrison's greed and paranoia. Cardinal Roberto Vasquez, a corrupt Mexican bishop who'd been laundering cartel money through church donations for 15 years. Complete backstory. Vatican connections that checked out. Financial records showing successful laundering of $89 million in cartel money. Bank accounts with $45 million. Money I'd actually traced and redirected from Morrison's previous schemes. Morrison took the bait within hours. The prospect of expanding his destruction operation internationally while earning millions in cartel money was irresistible. Morrison greeted Cardinal Vasquez like a long-lost brother. Expensive Italian suit. Gold Rolex Submariner worth $35,000. Diamond Episcopal ring that I recognized from crime scene photos. It had belonged to Father Martinez, one of Morrison's murdered victims. He was wearing a dead priest's ring like a trophy. But what made my blood freeze was what I saw in his office. Photos on his desk showing him with children from his retreat programs. Smiling, innocent faces of kids who'd never made it home. Morrison kept pictures of his victims displayed like family photos. "Beautiful children," he said, noticing my stare. "God calls us to guide the young and vulnerable. Some need more intensive guidance than others." But then I noticed something that made my Marine training kick in. The photos weren't just trophies. They were evidence Morrison was still actively trafficking. Several pictures showed children with timestamp data from within the last month. Fresh victims were still being processed through his system. "These little ones are at my Guatemala facility now," Morrison continued, pointing to a photo of 3 boys who couldn't have been older than 8. Amazing how quickly children adapt to new environments when they understand it's God's will. He was taunting me with evidence of ongoing child trafficking while discussing expanding his criminal empire. Morrison opened a laptop and showed me live security footage from multiple locations. Children in cages. Adults in expensive suits selecting victims from lineups. Real-time trafficking operations broadcast like a twisted shopping network. "Our clients appreciate being able to see the merchandise before purchase," Morrison explained. "Quality control is essential in any business." He was showing me children being sold like livestock while calling it business quality control. But Morrison's technological sophistication went beyond simple surveillance. He'd developed a global client database with over 15,000 registered buyers across 47 countries. Each client had detailed profiles showing their preferences, purchasing history, and payment reliability. The system included ratings and reviews. Clients could rate their experiences and leave feedback about specific children. Morrison had gamified child trafficking like a customer service platform. "Repeat customers appreciate quality assurance," Morrison explained, showing me spreadsheets tracking client satisfaction scores. "We maintain a 94% approval rating across all demographics." Morrison had turned child trafficking into a customer service industry with performance metrics and quality control standards. "The key," Morrison explained, "is making the accusations so heinous that people stop thinking rationally. Child abuse allegations destroy a man so completely that no one questions the evidence. But sometimes, even destroyed men keep talking. That's when more permanent solutions become necessary." He showed me files on his next targets. 18 priests across 9 states. Morrison was planning to destroy 15 with false accusations. The other 3 would be eliminated through accidents arranged by his military contractors. "This priest here has already contacted federal authorities. He'll need to have a heart attack before he can testify." But then Morrison opened a different file that made me want to vomit. Photos of children from various parishes, ages 8 to 14, with detailed psychological profiles and vulnerability assessments. "Fresh inventory for our Mexican partners," Morrison explained casually. "These children have already been psychologically evaluated. No strong family connections, minimal community ties. They won't be missed for months, if ever." The files were horrifyingly detailed. Each child's profile included trauma history, family dynamics, and specific vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Morrison had a team of social workers and psychologists identifying the most defenseless children in our communities. He was showing me his shopping catalog of children marked for trafficking. "The beauty of our system is that we're actually helping these children find new families who really want them," Morrison continued. "Better than foster care or abusive homes." But the most sickening revelation was Morrison's breeding program. Photos of teenage girls with their babies, all being raised in captivity to produce the next generation of victims, children born into trafficking, never knowing freedom existed. "Second-generation inventory is always higher quality," Morrison explained. "They're properly trained from birth, never develop attachment to the outside world." Morrison had convinced himself that child trafficking was a charitable service. The financial projections showed Morrison planned to expand his operation to 2,000 children annually by 2025. He'd calculated that demand for child trafficking was growing faster than supply, creating a lucrative market opportunity. He was treating child trafficking like a growth industry with expansion targets and market analysis. Morrison's business plan included franchising opportunities for other corrupt religious leaders. He'd developed a training program teaching bishops and pastors how to establish their own trafficking networks using his proven methods. "Religious authority is the perfect cover," Morrison's training materials explained. "Communities trust us with their most vulnerable members. Parents will literally hand us their children if we frame it as spiritual service." The franchise program had already attracted 34 religious leaders across 12 denominations. Morrison was preparing to industrialize child trafficking across American Christianity. But the expansion plans revealed Morrison's ultimate goal: political control through systematic blackmail of American leadership. By 2030, Morrison projected he would have compromising evidence against 500 federal officials, 2,000 state legislators, and 50,000 local leaders. Morrison wasn't just building a trafficking empire, he was engineering the complete corruption of American democracy through institutionalized child abuse. Morrison wasn't just explaining his past crimes, he was planning future murders. But he revealed something even worse. Morrison's operation extended internationally. He'd been coordinating with corrupt church officials in Mexico, Colombia, and the Philippines to create a network for laundering criminal money through religious organizations. We can move hundreds of millions without attracting attention, and if anyone gets suspicious, we simply eliminate them. Morrison was running an international conspiracy that turned religious institutions into weapons for organized crime. That night I didn't pray for forgiveness. I prayed for clarity and the strength to do what justice demanded. I triggered Morrison's own security system against him, but I also activated protocols I'd established during classified military service. Protocols that connected directly to federal counterintelligence networks Morrison didn't know existed. Every confession was being transmitted in real time to agencies that specialized in international organized crime and terrorism financing. I spent 18 hours building the most comprehensive criminal case of my military career, coordinating with federal agencies I'd worked with during classified operations. Morrison had defrauded the Catholic Church for over $340 million. He'd destroyed 53 innocent priests. He'd enabled 17 known pedophiles. He'd arranged the murders of 4 priests. But more importantly, he'd turned religious institutions into weapons for international organized crime. The cartel money wasn't just drug profits, it was terrorism financing, money that would fund attacks on American soil. Morrison was an international terrorist financier who used religious authority as cover. But I found the most damning evidence in Morrison's personal safe. DNA samples from children who'd gone through his trafficking network, stored as insurance against clients who might betray him. Hair, blood, fingernails, collected as leverage against powerful pedophiles who'd purchased children through his system. Morrison had biological evidence linking senators, judges, corporate executives, and foreign officials to child trafficking. He wasn't just running a criminal network, he was controlling American policy through pedophile blackmail. The scope was breathtaking. Morrison had compromised the integrity of federal courts, legislative votes, and international trade agreements by providing children to officials who then owed him absolute loyalty. But the insurance vault revealed something even more horrifying. Morrison had been recording everything. Thousands of hours of video showing powerful Americans committing crimes against children. Supreme Court justices, cabinet members, Fortune 500 CEOs, all captured on camera destroying innocent lives. The blackmail network extended to 12 foreign governments. Morrison had been providing children to diplomats and intelligence officials, then using the evidence to influence international policy. Arms deals, trade agreements, military alliances, all negotiated by officials who were being blackmailed with evidence of child abuse. Morrison wasn't just a child trafficker. He was operating a shadow government controlled through pedophile blackmail. The financial records showed Morrison had received $340 million in consulting fees from foreign governments over the past decade, payment for policy influence purchased through child trafficking and blackmail. Morrison had turned child abuse into international espionage. The intelligence operation was coordinated through a private military contractor called Divine Security Solutions that Morrison owned through shell companies. The company employed former CIA operatives, NSA analysts, and military intelligence specialists who used their government training to protect Morrison's trafficking networks. Divine Security had infiltrated federal law enforcement agencies, placing operatives in the FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security. These embedded agents would alert Morrison to investigations, eliminate evidence, and neutralize threats to his operations. The company's client list included foreign intelligence services who paid Morrison for access to compromised American officials. Morrison wasn't just blackmailing politicians for policy influence. He was selling American state secrets to hostile governments. Colonel James Mitchell, Morrison's head of security, was a former Delta Force operator who'd gone rogue after being discharged for war crimes. Mitchell's team of 47 operatives provided muscle for Morrison's operations while conducting intelligence gathering and elimination services. Morrison had built a private intelligence agency that rivaled government capabilities while serving foreign enemies and criminal organizations. At 6 a.m. Sunday, I sent one signal to Task Force Archangel, a classified federal unit that specialized in eliminating terrorist financing networks that used religious institutions as cover. Coordinated raids in 17 states and 4 countries. Morrison was in federal custody facing terrorism financing charges by 8 a.m. The FBI raid found $14.7 million in cash, gold bars worth $6.3 million, and communications equipment that connected directly to terrorist cells in Syria, Afghanistan, and Somalia. But they also found Morrison's insurance vault. 400 DNA samples from trafficked children. Video recordings of powerful Americans committing unspeakable acts with minors. Financial records showing payments from 12 senators, 8 federal judges, and 43 corporate executives for access to children. Morrison had been using child trafficking to control American government and business for over 15 years. Every major policy decision, every critical court ruling, every international trade agreement had been influenced by officials who owed Morrison silence in exchange for his protection of their crimes. When agents opened Morrison's personal computer, they found live streaming footage from 12 locations where trafficked children were being held. Morrison had been watching real-time abuse of children while planning his next operations. When Morrison called from federal holding, his voice was shaking. "Michael, please. This is all a misunderstanding. I was trying to infiltrate criminal organizations to protect the church." "No, Morrison. You were funding terrorism while hiding behind sacred authority. You stole from children with cancer to fund attacks on innocent people. You destroyed innocent priests to protect your criminal empire. They're saying I could get life in prison. You funded organizations that murder children. You protected pedophiles who destroyed innocents. You used God's name to enable evil." The international investigation revealed church money had funded attacks that killed 247 innocent people across 3 continents. 17 other corrupt bishops were arrested. 43 priests who'd been blackmailed into silence were freed. 6 known pedophiles who'd been protected were finally prosecuted. The trial lasted 18 months and became the largest terrorism financing case in American history. Morrison had personally transferred $127 million to known terrorist organizations. He'd destroyed 53 innocent priests. He'd enabled 17 pedophiles. He'd arranged 4 murders. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Life in prison without parole. Solitary confinement for the rest of his life as a designated terrorist financier. Cardinal Williams appointed me to lead the Truth and Restoration Commission. We found 53 men whose lives had been destroyed by Morrison's lies. 38 were still alive, broken, and forgotten. 15 had died in disgrace. Every falsely accused priest received public vindication, financial restitution, and the opportunity to return to ministry. Father Rodriguez was reinstated and given leadership of youth protection. Father Thompson, who'd nearly been murdered, was promoted to oversee financial transparency. The 4 murdered priests received posthumous vindication and memorial services attended by thousands. We identified and prosecuted the 17 pedophiles Morrison had protected. Father Kowalski was convicted of 23 counts of child sexual abuse. Father Santos was convicted of abusing 31 children over 8 years. Morrison's most horrific secret: he'd been operating a network that trafficked children between parishes, providing fresh victims to pedophiles who paid for protection. The federal investigation led to 127 additional arrests across 12 states. But the breakthrough came when we rescued the children who were still alive. 47 kids found in safe houses across 4 states, ages 8 to 16, all of whom had been reported missing from Morrison's parish programs over the previous 3 years. The rescue operation required military precision. Each safe house was guarded by armed traffickers with orders to eliminate evidence if discovered. We coordinated simultaneous raids using federal tactical teams I'd helped train. When we breached the first location, what we found exceeded our worst fears. Children who'd been so systematically abused they could barely remember their real names. Kids who'd been drugged, tortured, and programmed to believe their families had abandoned them. One girl, maybe 10 years old, asked me, "Are you here to hurt us too?" The man in the collar said God wanted us to serve the special adults. Morrison had convinced trafficked children that sexual abuse was religious service commanded by God. But the rescue revealed Morrison's most sophisticated evil. The children had been subjected to advanced psychological conditioning that made them unable to trust potential rescuers. They'd been programmed to believe that anyone claiming to help them was actually a test of their obedience to Morrison. "He told us that people would pretend to rescue us," one boy explained. "He said if we trusted them, we'd be punished worse than before." The deprogramming process took months. Children had to relearn basic concepts like safety, trust, and love. Many couldn't remember their birth names or original families. Morrison had systematically erased their identities and replaced them with trafficking personas. Dr. Sarah Chen, the trauma specialist we brought in, said these children had endured psychological conditioning more sophisticated than anything she'd seen in military torture programs. Morrison had industrialized the destruction of human souls. The $340 million Morrison had stolen was recovered and returned with matching Vatican funds. Children's cancer research received full funding plus endowments. Hurricane victims got comprehensive rebuilding assistance. The Vatican offered me promotion to cardinal. I declined. My calling was serving real people wounded by Morrison's evil. I founded the Shepherd's Shield Foundation with $50 million in recovered assets. We developed revolutionary protocols for handling abuse allegations that protected both victims and innocent clergy, professional investigations by federal agents, financial auditing to identify corruption-motivated accusations. We created rapid response teams that could identify and eliminate criminal networks using religious institutions as cover. Within 3 years, Shepherd's Shield had investigated over 400 cases across 23 denominations and 17 countries. We'd identified 47 more criminal schemes. We'd protected 89 innocent clergy while ensuring 73 real abusers were prosecuted. We'd dismantled 12 international networks that used religious organizations to launder money for terrorism, human trafficking, and child exploitation. The community that had abandoned me returned, stronger and more united. We rebuilt bigger than before. The homeless shelter expanded to 5 buildings serving 800 people nightly. The food bank fed 1,200 families weekly. Parents brought their children back with apologies. You'd spent 20 years proving who you were. We let fear override faith and knowledge. The children Morrison had traumatized with fake abuse stories received professional counseling. Most recovered completely from his psychological manipulation. Morrison's former victims became our strongest advocates for both justice and healing. I'm 57 now, 31 years ordained, 6 years since Morrison's conviction. Leading a parish of 4,500 members and overseeing Shepherd's Shield operations in 27 countries with a $127 million annual budget. The federal government retained me as consultant on religious terrorism. The Vatican appointed me to their International Security Commission. I'd written 3 books. The Enemy Within became required reading at 6 seminaries. Sacred Warriors was adopted by federal law enforcement training. Faith Under Fire helped thousands of abuse survivors. Speaking fees alone were 7 figures annually. I'd proven that spiritual authority combined with tactical training could create unprecedented protection for innocent people. Morrison had been abused by clergy as a child, but instead of becoming an advocate for protection, he'd chosen to become an exploiter. He'd turned his victimization into justification for victimizing others. He'd convinced himself the church was inherently corrupt, so stealing was justified. He'd decided priests were likely abusers anyway, so destroying innocent men was preemptive justice. Morrison had let childhood trauma transform him into the very evil he'd once suffered under. I'd remarried. Maria Santos, a federal prosecutor who'd worked Morrison's terrorism case. She'd prosecuted 47 major organized crime cases. You're the only person who became holier by learning to fight more effectively. You've proven violence and spirituality can serve the same sacred purpose. Morrison's betrayal had forced me to integrate every aspect of my identity, veteran, priest, investigator, protector, into something that could serve God's people more effectively than any single role alone. Sometimes the most effective ministry happens when you're willing to fight evil directly. Sometimes protecting the innocent requires more than prayers and good intentions. Sometimes God calls warriors to become priests, and sometimes He calls priests to remember they were warriors first. I teach at the seminary now, training new priests to recognize and resist corruption. The devil's greatest victory isn't convincing people to stop believing in God. It's convincing them that God's representatives can't be trusted. Morrison did more damage to faith than 1,000 atheist arguments. Real spiritual authority serves others rather than exploiting them. Authentic religious leadership makes communities stronger. True faith calls corrupt power to account rather than protecting it. Morrison taught me that defending the innocent sometimes requires fighting those who claim to represent God. But he also taught me that God sometimes gives us exactly the skills we need to win those fights. I still carry Marine principles. Mission first, people always, integrity non-negotiable. But now those principles serve a higher calling. The mission is protecting God's people from those who would exploit their faith. The people are every victim of religious corruption, every falsely accused minister, every child taught to fear abuse allegations more than actual abuse. Morrison thought he could destroy me because he misunderstood what 25 years of ministry had taught me. It hadn't made me weak or naive. It had made me more dangerous to evil, not less. A priest who's forgotten how to fight is useless against real wolves in sheep's clothing. But a warrior who's learned to serve God's justice becomes something Morrison never expected. Morrison died in federal prison 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, alone and forgotten. His final request was to speak with a priest for last rites. I was the priest they called. I gave him the sacrament, listened to his final confession, and offered him the forgiveness that only God can truly give. Not because he deserved it, but because mercy is what separates justice from revenge. His last words were an apology to every priest he'd destroyed, every child he'd traumatized, every community he'd betrayed. I thought I was protecting the church. Instead, I was destroying it from within. I told him what I'd learned, that protecting anything sacred requires the courage to fight those who would corrupt it. That real faith isn't weakened by confronting evil. It's strengthened by it. God sometimes calls us to use our most dangerous skills in service of His most peaceful purposes. I'd spent 8 years learning to eliminate threats to innocent people, 25 years learning to heal spiritual wounds. Morrison forced me to combine both callings. Shepherd's Shield now operates in 18 states and 4 countries. We've prevented 43 religious fraud schemes, protected over 200 innocent clergy, and ensured proper prosecution of 89 real abuse cases. The real story is about children who can now trust religious authority because someone is watching to protect them. Communities that can have faith in their leaders because corruption will be exposed and punished. Morrison thought he could use sacred authority as a shield for criminal behavior. Instead, he taught me that sacred authority only works when it's backed by the willingness to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. This is my calling now, not just to serve God through ministry, but to protect God's people from those who would exploit their faith for personal gain. Morrison gave me the greatest education of my religious life. He showed me exactly how sacred trust could be weaponized against innocent people. But he also gave me purpose that combined every skill God had blessed me with. Sometimes God calls warriors to become priests, and sometimes He calls priests to remember they were warriors first. The children in our programs now learn that religious leaders are human beings who can choose evil, but they also learn that good people are always watching to protect them. Morrison's legacy is 53 destroyed lives and communities damaged by betrayed trust. My legacy is hundreds of protected children, dozens of saved ministries, and communities that know the difference between authentic spiritual authority and criminal exploitation. His story ended in darkness. Mine transformed darkness into light. Morrison taught me that evil often wears holy masks. But he also taught me that sometimes God calls His servants to remove those masks and expose the evil underneath. The mission continues. The flock is safer. The wolves have been identified and removed, and justice, tempered by mercy, has prevailed.